condition so bad.
Okay, so we are working through our scientific inquiry packet, and today we're going to be talking about variables. And I want you to know that this concept is one that's can be a little bit confusing, but I'm going to try to give us lots of examples so that I reduce the confusion. So first of all, the definition of variable is any condition that affects the outcome. Okay, so think about all of the different things that might affect how well a student does on a test, like their amount of sleep, how long they studied, how well they paid attention in class, how they're feeling, behavior of students around them, et cetera, et cetera. They could affect student performance. So these are all considered variables. You could determine so many variables in lots of scenarios. So the first step is just to think about what the variables might be. So what variables may affect the number of fish in a lake? So I'm sure that we came up with lots of ideas, and here were mine. I could list more than that. So pollution, the amount of fishing that happens, water quality, temperature, time of the year that you're looking at that. Now let's try to determine variables that might affect the speed of a runner in a 100-yard dash. Okay, I'm sure we came up with several as a class, and here were some of mine. What they're wearing, their shoes, the condition of the track. Have they been training for this? What's their hydration level? What about variables that might affect the attendance at a baseball game? Okay, this is what I came up with. Who's playing? What time of the day? What's the weather like? How much are the tickets? What about variables that affect the taste of soda? And variables that might affect the amount of fruit an apple tree produces? And what about variables that can affect student performance on a social studies quiz? I want you to think about these at your seat and come up with 3 to 5 variables in each of these scenarios that would affect those particular situations. So identifying variables, just determining what are the variables in this scenario is really important. So when we set up an experiment, an experimental design, you want to have as few variables as possible when conducting your experiment, but you're always going to have at least 3. Okay, so they are called the independent, the dependent, and the constant, also called the control. Okay, and I am also going to write over here, I'm going to tell you the definition of the control group. I'm actually going to add this here. So in an experiment, you're going to, what it means is you're going to make sure that the conditions are the same for all of the parts of your experiment except for 3 variables. Okay, you're going to make sure you're independent, you're dependent, and your controls. So the independent variable is what you change on purpose, what you change on purpose. We're going to do lots of examples. The dependent is what you measure. Okay, it's what you measure. So let's try to apply this in a scenario. What variables could affect the sprouting of a bean seed? So you can think of this like, okay, what kind of soil, how much water, okay, how much sunlight that seed gets. What else might affect the maybe the time of the year? Okay, I'm sure we could think of other things here, but those are the variables off the top of my head. So everything we just listed, so the exercise we just did where we listed all those variables, any of those, okay, any of those could become our independent variable. And what we're going to do when we set our experiment up is we're actually just going to choose one of these to test. So what might be the dependent variable? Like, what are we measuring? Okay, what are we measuring here? So the sprouting of a bean seed. So typically we could be measuring like time. Okay, we could be measuring height of the bean seed. Maybe we measure mass of the bean seed. And we would need to decide, what do we want to change on purpose? And what do we want to measure in accordance to that change? Okay, so if we go here to this next page, then you'll see that in addition to those independent and dependent, then you have what's called the constants or the controls. So these are going to be the condition or conditions that remain the same The same in an investigation. You have to have controlled variables so that you can determine if the independent variable actually caused the result or if it was something else. So in a perfect world, all of the variables would be controlled except for the independent. It just doesn't happen that often. Okay, so essentially, when we determine variables, like if we go back here and we say, okay, all of these could affect how the bean seed sprouts. So I want to test, for example, the amount of water, and I'm going to change this on purpose. And what that means is every other variable I listed here has to be controlled for the experiment. So that means that I'm going to make sure that all the plants have the same sunlight, that I'm running this the same time of the year, and that all the soil conditions are the same. The only thing I'm changing is the water. So these are actually going to become your controls. So if we go through and try to set up an experiment here, I'm going to draw a little picture here to show you how this might work. Okay, so if we want to, so I'm going to say we're going to have three, and yes, you would want to draw this too, three scenarios where we have pots here, pot A, B, and C. Okay, and we want to test a bean seed, so we're going to make sure that we put the same kind of seed in each pot. And I already determined that I want to test the water. Okay. So in pot A, I'm going to give it 100 milliliters of water every day. Pot B, let's give pot B 50 milliliters of water. In pot C, let's give C 0 milliliters of water. Okay. So in this scenario, my water is going to be my independent variable. Okay, so water becomes what I'm changing on purpose, independent variable. What do I want to measure? Okay, I want to measure the height. Let's just pick the height. This is going to become what we measure, or the dependent variable. So that means all my other possible variables in this experiment need to be the same. So if I have each of these up, then I'm going to say, okay, if I'm going to give them sunlight, let's make sure I give them all sunlight. So I'm going to say full sun. Okay, full sun and full sun. So I'm going to make sure they're all in the same amount of sun. And I'm going to also just say soil, 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 that they're all in the same kind of soil, meaning if I add fertilizer to one, I add it to all. And I'm going to make sure that this is like all the other conditions are the same that I can possibly control. The only thing that's different is water. I run this experiment, I collect the data, and I determined, okay, this plant actually grows the tallest. And so if I have my experiment controlled, then I can confidently say that this amount of water is the best for the bean plant because it grew the tallest. That's what I was measuring. And so you want to make sure that you don't have all these things that are changing, because you want to be able to say this is because of the water. And you don't want different things that have changed that could say, oh, well, the sunlight changed too. Is it because of the sunlight? We just don't know. So let's try this. 2 groups of students were tested to compare their speed working math problems. Each group was given the same problems. One group used calculators, the other without. So what is the independent? So what are we changing on purpose? Okay, so if you look here, each group was given the same problems. One group used calculators, the other did not. That's the difference. So the independent variable is calculators versus no calculators. What are we measuring? They were tested to compare their speed. So we were measuring how quickly they did this. And what's the constant or the control? Okay, they were given what? The same problems. So they were given the same problems. Let's try this again. Students of different ages were given the same puzzle and their assembly time was measured. So what are we changing on purpose? Well, notice some keywords here, different ages. So the students were not the same age. What were we measuring? The assembly time. What's going on with my thing here? The assembly time was measured, okay? Time. What did we keep the same? Same puzzle. Now, this takes practice. Okay, this takes practice. So we are going to continue to practice here in class, and we're going to do some more together. I have some handouts that I'm going to give you on variable practice that you're going to complete, and then we'll have some activities to do. But the best way to understand variables is just to practice variables.